everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Debbie Maples. Debbie is the Vice President of Global Safety, Security, Investigations, and Protection for Salesforce. She's an internationally recognized and awarded loss prevention and investigations professional. She's a certified forensic interviewer and serves on the board of advisors for the International Association of Interviewers. She is universally respected in the field and has so many years of experience and expertise to share with us. I'm really excited to get into this conversation with her today. And right out of the gate, she's going to talk about viewing leadership through the investigative lens. And satisfying my bias and opinion, of course, talks about how interview and interrogation can serve as the perfect on-ramp for leadership. She's going to talk about earning trust, the power of curiosity, leading across cultures as she leads a global organization, and the power of being over-prepared. It's a wonderful conversation. She has so much to share and a few great stories from her investigations career woven in, including a great one for building relationships and earning buy-in in Japan. So I'm really excited to share this conversation with everyone today. Of course, thank you all for being here week after week for these conversations. We truly appreciate it. Before you go at the end of the conversation, please take a moment to like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show, and go to the show notes and check out our sponsors. Visit humantel.com for all of your training and educational needs on understanding when people's emotions are shifting through identifying changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. You can even get 25% off their training with the code INQUASIVE25. You can check out, if you're a professional interviewer, you can check out certifiedinterviewer.com to learn all you need to know about the International Association of Interviewers and the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And of course, you can go to inquasive.com to learn more about the customized training programs our clients ask us to facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, and HR teams to teach them how to obtain the everyday confessions in their high-impact conversations. But enough about us. Without further ado, I would love to introduce to you Debbie Maples. Debbie, it is so great to see you. Thank you very much for being here today. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. It's the holidays. It's Christmas time. It is really stormy outside in California today. But life is good. I'm thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Yeah.
We were just talking a little bit of how I was in one of your backyards unknowingly this past weekend. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. You and I have, in a way, sort of orbited each other for years.
I know. So odd.
Without a whole lot of direct interaction. And we finally got the chance to connect earlier this year. So I'm really excited to ask a bunch of questions that I've been curious to ask for a long time, but really dive into the conversation with you. And for me, one of the things that, well, I guess two things that I've admired from the far as we've sort of been in the same circles. One is how universally respected you are and how everybody I've ever met has spoken so highly of you. So it's a high standard for me to live up to at the start of the conversation. But also, as you have transitioned your career over time away from a traditional loss prevention or security background into your career currently with Salesforce and so many other things that you've done as well. So really, I'm super curious to start the conversation by asking, how have you learned to apply the investigation skills that made you so successful earlier in your career to your leadership career?
That's a great question. And by the way, I have also admired you from afar. Like, I'm so excited to be talking to you. So in terms of how have I applied my investigation skills, first of all, I think it's important to say that investigations is my passion. So no matter what the current work that I'm leading, there is always an investigative lens, which sometimes is not, cool because you're looking at it through a lens of, what else? And this curiosity about, is there more to this situation than what I know? And so for me, the work of investigations as an investigator listen, I grew up in loss prevention, and loss prevention will always be a passion for me. And it is my first love, loss prevention, the holistic, you know, shortage reduction strategies. I was a store detective. I was a red coat. I was, I worked the supply chain DC sales in department stores. So, that those early years were really um, formative for me because there was no one lane to drive. You had to be pretty good at a lot of things. We were generalists, but the work of the investigations or the investigators when I was just really super junior, like I thought those people were so cool and they were so smart. And I was lucky enough to have a few female mentors. They were, senior investigators. They were super, super skilled. They were women, and that was uncommon. So I was like, I fell in love. Like I want to be like Abby Cohen. I want to be like Barbara Gressel. And these women are probably long retired and not even thinking about their names being spoken in this way. But they were the first women who inspired me to be good at something. We can be really capable of a lot of things, but is there something that you're really good at? And I wanted that to be investigations. I really wanted the passion of being curious. I said that earlier, being curious, being um, to keep looking and not be satisfied. And listen, I was a Wick-Randers-Olowski, groomed investigator. I went to every training. In fact, in the early years, they used to do a train the trainer. I was a part of that, and really kind of going back and asking Dave, can you help me to explain that one more time? Like I want to feel smooth in this area of whatever the topic was that I was feeling like I wasn't, my delivery wasn't great. So, striving for excellence has always been a part of my DNA. I'm a firstborn child. My parents were not happy about me doing loss prevention work because they thought it was so dangerous. They thought it was dangerous then. I can't even imagine now the world of LP for leaders, how it's really challenging. So well, really have woven in my leadership style so much of the discipline of operating with integrity, making sure that your team is clear on your expectations, you're clear on your expectations, and that your leaders can count on you. And, I've been super lucky to work with amazing leaders. I worked for Keith White for longer than I want to admit, John Gantenbein, John Manning, a number of supervisors that were just fantastic. And um, I think that when you are looking at your career, at least for me, I didn't anticipate it having all the twists and turns. I knew I was going to be in loss prevention. I knew I wanted to be a director. And then when I was a director, I wanted to be a senior director. And then when I was a senior director, I wanted to be a vice president. And when I was a vice president, I wanted to be international and global. And I didn't know that at the beginning, Michael. But, as opportunities came my way, I was super, super fortunate to have a husband who is, very supportive. If I talked about an opportunity with doubt, he would say, "Well, just go for it. Just go for it." And I think that's kind of the difference between females and males. Males just go for it. And women think about it. Like, is that something I'm going to do? Is that something I can do? Do I have all the skills? Do I have all the qualifications? And I'm grateful that each time an opportunity came up that was out of my comfort zone, I went for it. And the biggest leap was moving from loss prevention to corporate security. And I think that's like the genesis of what we're talking about. Like, how did those investigations, years of being responsible for investigations. You were the cool kid if you were really good at investigations, and you were even cooler if you were really good at interviewing. And I, I, I was good. I want to say that with humility, but I know that, my track record speaks for itself. And um, I also surrounded myself with really good people. Like if somebody had a reputation of being good, I wanted to be in an interview with them because I wanted to learn. And that I think that the foundational skills of doing investigations and doing interrogation or interviews lead or create so much runway for you in leadership as a whole. Negotiating, persuasion, empathy, um, facts. We call it data driven analysis today, but like what is the truth, right? I think are you the one that says what's the truth of the matter? Somebody says what's the truth of the matter in the IAI world, but what is the truth about this situation? And I think that that's fundamental in leadership is, can you see your opportunity, your objective, your goals for what they need to be and what they are. I think I've just gone on a rant. So let me pause because I've said a lot.
You have. You said a lot. You said a lot of great stuff. That wasn't a rant. That was all really good. Now my challenge is to remember like the 17 follow-up questions I want to ask from all the cool stuff that you said. But I'll go all the way back to when you talked about the curiosity, the what else, the what's next. And selfishly, I feel like, especially early on, coming up a little bit similar in investigations and doing the interviews and doing the interrogations. And I think for me too, being very fortunate to have the opportunity to work for WZ at some point, like we said, we did investigations, but really we were just doing interrogations. Like there was no time and no ability to do the investigation. So, but to that what next mentality. And I feel like that curiosity you talked about, and I'll actually even put two things together, that empathetic curiosity, developing the ability to be curious in a way where people don't feel attacked because of it. They don't feel judged because of it, but not being satisfied that the truth has been arrived at or that the answer is known or that the simplest answer is necessarily the right answer, that contextual awareness of, there's probably more out here. How do I get to it? And I think your quote is perfect. I'm biased, of course, but I think interview and interrogation is a wonderful runway to leadership. When you think about what it takes to conduct an investigation, build relationships, I mean, people like, wait a minute, what? When you interrogate somebody, you're building a relationship with them? Well, yeah, how else do you get someone to tell you a deep, dark secret
That
in 60
rapport is
minutes or
important.
less?
That's right.
That's exactly what we're doing. So, no, I thought that was wonderful. So you mentioned the transition more into corporate security, which is what you're doing now, and beyond, of course. I'm curious at the level of meetings that you find yourself in, the level of decision making that you are a part of with your organization now. I'm going to ask a question that there might not be a direct answer to. So
Mm-hmm.
to the degree that you feel comfortable, how often do you find people surprised with how you apply your investigative approach to arrive at an answer that nobody else has thought about or nobody else has considered?
I don't think they know.
I love
So remember, I grew up. So the last 25, 30 years has been in the retail environment. I am now in the tech environment. So I work for Salesforce. I'm the vice president of security operations, protective services, which is EP or executive protection, and travel security, as well as corporate investigations. So investigations is never far from anything that I do because then I would not be doing work that I love, right? Now I don't do any of these things. I have teams that do these things. So in the tech environment, I've only been here, I'm going on 4 years. So these folks don't know my reputation. They don't know my history. If they're curious, I get a lot of folks looking at my LinkedIn at Salesforce after I've met with them. And then it probably becomes more clear my background or my passion when I'm working with human resources. We call them employee services in this world,
Mm-hmm.
ES and employee relations. Um, Generally, if it's a first time I've met them, I always tell them who I am. I tell them I'm CFI. I'm a CFI interviewer, and I share, my responsibilities in my past because I don't have the earned credibility that I had in loss prevention. And people in loss prevention knew that I was experienced. They knew that I was a kid growing up in this industry and became an old woman who now continues to lead this work, but with it's not just work for me; it's passion. And so I do share when they are curious, especially in the areas of legal, employee relations, and human resources, my background, because I am trying to fast track some of that credibility. If I can say it
Yeah.
that way, it might sound horrible, but I mean, I think I'm trying to say you don't know me. We've never worked together. There's 85,000 employees. We're worldwide. We operate, all over the world. So I have responsibility of every office in every country that we're in all over the world. And so they don't know. And so trying to help them to understand maybe the experiences I've had, hopefully will help them to trust my judgment and my perspective. And I think that um, it- when you know that, then you can see why my perspective may be a little less risk tolerant. I'm thinking about due diligence. I'm thinking about legal implication. I'm thinking about lawsuits. I'm thinking about our responsibility, our duty to care, our duty to warn, our duty to advise. And so I feel like when you get my history, then you understand why my voice may be different than the voices of my colleagues. I mean, my colleagues lead technology, innovation, our GSOC, our Intel, um, our events. I think my lane is very specific. It's very much about the people. It's very much about the impact of the company, and so are theirs, but in a different vein. It's a different, um, uh, thought or filter, I should say, in terms of why I have the opinions that I have. Um, and I am more conservative. I know that. I'm generally that voice of reason. I heard actually right before this call, I was on a team call, and we have, at Salesforce, if you're following us, we're like innovators. We're building these agents that help organizations operate. And it's as if you're speaking with a human. It's that AI, like crazy, crazy amazing. And one of the ideas of the agents that we're building felt uncomfortable for our leader, our not my chief, but our his boss's boss. And he was like, if you have to explain it, then I don't know if it's the first priority. And interesting, I said the same thing a few weeks ago to our group. Now I was the naysayer in that, and I was just like, this doesn't feel intuitive to me. It doesn't feel like it would lend confidence. And I don't know if that's going to make sense to people. And today, our leader was talking about, it didn't make sense to him. And I was like, didn't make sense to me either. But, I am not, I don't need to die on a hill for things that just because they don't make sense to me. Like, I trust that I work with really smart people. And if the majority of them get it, then I'm going to get it too. I'm going to be supportive of it. I'm going to, lean in the way I need to with my team. And I'm going to, be on board. But sometimes I know that my voice is different. It has a different, way of looking at things. And I like it. I like that, I'm not the follower. I have two kids, and I was always asking them, "You're going to be the leader, or you're going to be a follower?" Because you want to be the leader, and it's okay if you want to be the follower, but I want you to be a leader and I want you to want to be a leader. And my two kids are really, terrific leaders. And so I think that, I'm totally on a rant now, but getting back to your question, in the room, is my voice different because of the investigative lens? Absolutely. And I think most of the time it's more conservative, which I do wish sometimes I was just a little more risk tolerant, like, yeah, it's okay. But I'm not. I have to really kind of think about, is it worth it?
I think that's where the balance, now I'm going to make layers of assumptions here, but I think that's where the balance, especially in the tech environment where you are now, is so important. So
Right.
to highlight a few things going back, I feel like the way that you illustrated how you share your experience, especially with like the HRER community to help fast track that credibility, makes perfect sense because to a large degree, you're speaking their language. They are thinking more about risk and employee relations and legal and ripple effects and
Mhm.
all of precedent and all of these other things. So I have no doubt that you're not forwarding them your CV and bragging before a conversation, but in anecdotal form, you're building
Mhm.
rapport. You mentioned it early. You're building rapport to fast track that credibility in that relationship so you can work with them and collaborate on the right decision. So that makes perfect and total sense. And then with the tech group, I would imagine, here come my assumptions, that especially in that world, because things move so fast and things develop so fast, people get a great idea, and by the time they're done speaking it, they're already like 100 yards down the field running with it. So
That's right.
sometimes having that balance back and forth. Years ago, I was working with an organization in Southern California, and kind of similarly, they were all excited going through this whole big idea. And honestly, people make fun of me for saying it, but I sat in on whiteboarding sessions that felt like pregame speeches in locker rooms. Like these people were so charismatic and so smart that by the time they were done, I'm in. I don't understand half of what you just said, but I'm in.
Yes. But
And
you're
after,
inspired.
and after this one particular, I started asking questions. And I asked to, drill down, asked a few follow-up questions. And finally, this one guy, Paul, got frustrated. He just turned around, he looks at me and he says, "You just think of everything, don't you?" And I looked at him like, "Well, it's what you hired me for." Like, to answer your question, no, I don't think of everything. There's always something I miss, but this is exactly what you hired me for. So I would feel like your conservative approach is likely a great balance to that move fast, fail fast, charge forward mentality. Just to help kind of make sure we're not running into anything that could be obvious to somebody with that lens, but somebody without that lens who's never had to think about it.
Right.
Yeah, I never worked
That
at
scrum mentality is hard to jump in on when you've not been a part of it, when you didn't grow up in it.
yeah.
And but you have to have it
Yes.
because it is the it is the pace and you've got to adopt.
Yeah. And you mentioned not dying on the hill, and I've seen you ask questions and give feedback in meetings before. So I would imagine that's probably emblematic of your approach consistently. But the way you provide feedback and ask questions not only shows poise and intelligence and credibility and all those things, thoughtfulness as you do it, but by choosing not to die on some hills, then makes the hills you're willing to die on that much more credible.
Absolutely. Say yes as often as you can so that when you say no, it's respected, is the kind of words for me to live by. I did it with my kids. I do it with my employees or the people that work for me that are on my team. Um, and, even with my leader, um, you know, he can ask me to do anything and I am there. I'm all about it. But if there's something I really don't think we should be doing, I don't want to be a yes man. I want it to be thoughtful and I want it to be um I want to have a reason for it to be a strong no
Mhm.
or hell no. We should not be doing this. This is not
Over
good.
my dead body. I'm
Yeah,
actually
let's not do this.
I just wrote that quote down. Say yes as often as possible. So when you say no, it's respected. I love that. And I also love how you said that's how you raised your kids. Recently, I was leading an event specifically for parents. And one of the things I said was find reasons to say yes. And
Yeah,
people looked at me like, what? I'm like, you're going to tell your kids no all the time. If all I do is tell them no, it's going to fall on deaf ears and they're going to do what they want to anyway. So if I can find reasons to say yes as often as possible, when I say no, No is a no. And
Yeah.
now it feels entirely different. I love that.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you have the slight and small responsibility of every single office all around the world, which I'm sure is no big deal, just a couple of people in a couple of places. But I am curious, as you've learned through this role over the last 4 years, how have you had to adapt your communication approaches, especially in a leadership role, as you have interacted with people around the world?
Oh my gosh, like cultural nuance is everything. And I do think that as an American, the way that we work, the way that we operate is very, very challenging for other cultures. And to understand that cultural nuance and sensitivity and investing in understanding their culture. I work with our India team quite closely, and actually, I don't directly. I have a direct responsibility for the India offices, and the leader of our security operations now reports to our chief because the operation is so big, and so I'm his dotted line leader, and I tease him that it took me a minute to understand that when leaders in India are nodding their head no, they mean yes. Or when they're doing this, they mean no. And so up and down, side to side means, entirely different things than the American filter. And that took me a minute to understand it because I'm like, wait a minute. In investigations, when they're shaking their head no, but they're saying yes, they really mean no. you know, so I have to think about like wait, there's something, and I had to directly ask the question. Wait a minute, you are nodding your head no, but you are saying yes. Tell me. And it's not universal. It is trained. It's nurtured, and so I think that when you're thinking about Europe or European, very different from Asian, very different from Western. Even like in America, we know that state to state to state to state, we have our own cultures. I live in California. And when I meet people from the South, oh, California, listen, I grew up in Berkeley, one of the most liberal cities in the world. And I am not particularly liberal. I'm actually probably conservatively liberal. Probably all the conservatives are like, you're so liberal. But I mean, I know that it is wise as leaders to understand the culture from organization to organization, culture from teams to teams, culture from country to country. You have to. And yeah, like it's all, yeah, sometimes what I like to go, stop. And like, can we just all get along? But, you have to respect different cultures to enable in order to be effective. Like what's the deal here? What do we need to do? I'll tell you an interesting issue. We had a problem we're working on. It was a whistleblower situation. Yeah, I still get involved in whistleblower cases, especially when they're, involving more senior people. And the whistleblower situation was one of our Asian offices, and it said that people are congregating in the break rooms and the lunch rooms, and it looks like they're taking longer lunches and longer breaks than they're supposed to. And it was a whole rant. And when I began to have conversations with the leaders, they were like, oh, no, they're not taking longer lunches or breaks. That's after their shifts or before their shift. They're coming in so they can have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. It's actually not coffee, it's tea. And they're going to have a meal with their friends. So no, they're off the clock. It may look like that to the American eye, but that's not what's happening. And so understanding the culture and actually like going through some like quick lesson. If it's a culture I'm not familiar with, you have to catch yourself up pretty fast in order to be able to communicate with the leadership and to be able to, uh, you know, make believers out of them that you really are there to support them. You really do care about their country, their business, their employees.
When you're catching yourself up, I'm imagining you do that in a combination of ways, but is it like research? Is it asking people who've worked there before? Is it speaking directly to people who are of that culture or from that culture for their direct input? Is it a mix of all the above?
It's all of it. I remember when I was at the Gap, we were opening China stores, and I I had really good leaders that worked for us. And when I mean, I have a practice of doing skip levels with my leaders, and one on ones. I'm really big on one on ones. I don't really like meetings, like team big meetings, but I like my one on one. I feel it's more intimate. I get more information, and there's a stronger bond is built. I ask about the culture. I ask about the language. I ask what words do I need to know, and it's not like out the gate. It's over time
Mm-hmm.
to continue to invest in understanding the culture, understanding um, the mindset of the people. What does integrity mean to this culture? What does it not mean? What are my assumptions are this? I always kind of share what I think, and I ask, like, tell me, like, is what else do I need to know? Am I off track? I'm okay with being vulnerable in that way. Actually, I feel like it is one of the things that was a secret sauce in being successful in investigation is that if my rationalizations were at all stories about my own life or my own upbringing or my own, you know, bad choices, that I was able to, my message resonated in a greater way. And so it's the same thought process in building rapport with the people that you work with, and with folks you don't know very well, is that if you can be transparent and vulnerable, and actually, um, one of Salesforce's values um, is transparency. Can we be transparency? Our number one value is trust. So trust is everything, which I love, which is why I love this company. It's because, yeah, it wasn't retail, but like they value trust. And so every culture, every office, no matter where it is in the world, trust is our number one value. So we begin with that. And then transparency and how vulnerable you are is, I think helps you to connect with people, and um, they appreciate your honesty, because transparency and trust doesn't mean rolling over. It can also mean being really honest about, you know, what you need, what the next step is, how do you move forward. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, delivering that with some cultural sensitivity and, understanding all the things that are different than our own um, filter is really important.
And I would imagine, well, I guess I've seen it a little bit myself as well, but I feel like anytime we're meeting a group of people in any scenario that we're foreign to, whether that's, here we're working for a new company or like live foreign
Yeah.
in the traditional sense of working with people in another country, that the last thing they want to see, but often the first thing that they expect is that someone is going to show up and fake it till they make it, or act like they know, or pretend, or make all of these assumptions. So to do the exact opposite and to show up and be humble and ask and follow their lead, I feel like has potentially even double the impact that it normally would, because it tends to go against their expectations. So that transparency and that humility and that genuine curiosity resonates even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. The last thing any international business partner wants is for you to tell them how to do it, and that what's the right way for it to be done. I do think that you have to, as a leader, to align on, what are the deal breakers. Here are some things that we have to have in place. These are some things that are non-negotiables, but you let it be there. Yeah, here's how we do it here. Here's where we're trying to go. How do we deliver this, and how do we execute this in in India, in China, in Japan, like all different. And how you get there is important, like the how, always the how. But as long as you get to your destination, and accepting that the American way isn't always the only way. It's not the only way. And I, I I have an amazing leader in France, and she's very, very uh, effective in how she says, "No, that won't work here." And in France, we do it like this, and I'm like, "Okay, okay, that's good to know. Tell me more. Why do you do it that way? Is there a legal requirement? Is it because it's just the preferred way, or like what's the why?" And I again, you can go back and think about, we all always interested in the why. Because if you can get to the why, if it needs to be fixed, then you have something to work with. You have your root cause, right? So the why is really important, and um, understanding that the how could be a different journey. Um, but as long as you get to the destination that you're striving for, I think that's what's important.
And I love how you followed that up with, it's not just this won't work here. This is how we do it.
Mhm,
Great. Tell me more. Walk me
mhm,
through. Why is it
mhm,
done that way?
mhm,
If it wasn't that investigative mentality, it might just be, okay, we'll do it that way, which is the way we could very well end up doing it. But
mhm.
now, if we understand why it's done that way, what are the expectations? How's it been done previous? What's the goal? What are the most important things, to your point? Now that how might be adjusted a little bit based on their cultural expectations and the goal that we're setting out to achieve. You mentioned earlier how trust was the number one thing, no matter where you're operating in the globe.
Mhm.
I am curious as to any differences you've seen operating globally and how that trust is earned from culture to culture.
Oh, definitely. Like in some of our Asia offices, trust is earned. It's not lost. I think that you know, Americans, you lose trust if you do something, right? But you start off with trust, innocent until proven guilty. You start off with trust. In some countries, you have to earn trust. You have to, earn that seat at the table. And so I will talk about Gap. I had the Japan business for years, and so the leader, one of the leaders, because there were a few presidents there, but one of the country leader, he was very difficult for me when I first began to work with the market. And I wanted international so bad. So I like this had to work because I was like, I want international. And he would not look at me. He would just not, I would, and we always had an interpreter because, he did not, he knew how to speak English, but he did not prefer to speak English. So he had an interpreter. And so, um, he would ask a question through his interpreter. I would look at him and answer, and he would not ever make eye contact with me, ever. And interesting enough, we were talking about organized retail crime, and I was trying to suggest that we implement some physical security, support, because in Japan, trust is the number one. People don't do bad things. It's a very low risk country. It's a very, gentle culture. People don't do bad things maliciously. And so he would never accept. And I had had multiple visits about the theft and the increasing shrink in Japan, in Tokyo. And, and I had some reports of wallets were being stolen out of the back room. And we didn't even have a leader in country because that's how low risk and low. And I was like, Jesus, these people don't understand that people are stealing in our stores. I'd go in and I'd do some store visits. And mind you, this is like once or twice a year. There would be tickets in the fitting rooms and tickets shoved under the seats. And but they did not believe that anybody was stealing. And I I had an American leader say, they're not going to believe anybody's stealing. So don't suggest that people steal in Japan. And so I got to thinking, and I was like, but they are stealing in Japan. They're stealing their wallets, they're stealing their money, they're stealing their clothes, they're stealing their product. They're not having grab and runs, they're not having mob thefts, but they're stealing. People steal. And so while doing visits there, this is a funny story, but it's perfect about culture. I was asking about, I saw some homeless people and I was like, is this a rising problem? What's going on? And, in the United States, we have this problem. And they're like, oh, those aren't Japanese people. Those are Mongolians. Those are visitors. Those are people from other countries. That's not our people. I was like, oh, so it's somebody else that's coming in and changing their environment. It's not their own. And so with that leader, as we're talking about theft in stores, I said, you are the number one tourist destination. People love coming here, and not everybody that comes here is trustworthy. For the first time, he looked at me in my eyes. I said, these visitors that are coming into your country and coming into your stores, they're stealing in your fitting rooms. They're tearing the tickets off the product and they're shoving them under the benches. They're shoving them behind the mirrors. I'm working with your team to how to drive awareness. And he looked at me and he said, you're right. You're right. And that's when I got permission to put cameras into those Japan stores, to put technology into those Japan stores, because it wasn't them. It was offensive for me to suggest that the Japanese people would be stealing. No, but all these tourists come here every day. Planes of people come in and they are not always trustworthy. And so, that was just a really big aha for me, that, getting to a place where he actually could trust me and he could look at me and he was still talking and the translator was still translating, but now he was looking at me. And that was an unlock. And that applies to every country, whether it's in France or Japan, China, and India. We don't all view the world through the same filter. And so if you can get, some understanding of how you can influence and persuade and build rapport. And by the way, that applies to the United States as well. It's not every interview, not every interrogation is going to be easy because they grew up like you. I was particularly good at interviewing streetwise people. And I was pretty good at rescuing interviews that other interviewers were interviewing people who were very streetwise, and the clock was ticking and they had to shut down the interview because the culture was different. The rationalizations had to be different. And, understanding the why somebody does something, or making some good rationalizations, or creating some good rationalizations in terms of why they would be able to open up a little bit, worked. And that, I think, is really important for an interviewer, is to understand. And I know that the team at WZ gets that. They're professionals. Not every interviewer understands that same rationalization is not going to work for everybody. It's not. And if you can't flex and adjust, understanding the mindset of that person, and hopefully you've done your homework and you get their background and you can go in there with a little bit of a plan. It's the same thing in business. If you're meeting a new business partner, you got to go in with a plan. What are they about? What's their reputation? I live in a world of transparency. I can go look at their employee engagement scores. What's that organization like? Are they happy? Or do they have are they going through turmoil or adjustment? And so do your homework. When you do your homework, that's 101 for investigations. You are better. You are better. You have an edge. And I think that, for the younger leader who's trying to find their way and figure out, like, who are they going to be? Um, that I learned completely from my investigations path. Do your work, do your background work.
Do it up front. By the way, I just want to point out that that was a genius move with the story that you told about solving the theft problem in Japan. Genius. And if people didn't pick up on the nuance there, having the wherewithal to connect dots that other people don't connect, like the potential homeless issue and the potential theft issue, they are not two different things. And I'm not saying that homeless people are stealing, don't take it that
No,
way,
no,
but they potentially have themes, they have underlying nuances, abilities to connect with how people think, how people perceive, how people make decisions. And for you to connect those dots in real time and pivot and apply that in the conversation you were having was absolute genius. I hope people picked up on how smart that was to make that correlation and tie those two together. And your point about doing your homework up front is so spot on. So many times, and whether it's something that's happens in a leadership meeting or something that happens in an interrogation afterwards, people are like, well, how did you know to ask that? Where did you come up with that? I did my prep. Like, I knew the goal I needed to achieve. I knew who I needed to achieve it with. I knew the context of the situation. So I prepared accordingly. Like, it might have looked like magic in the moment, but it wasn't. It was the preparation that allowed us to be that successful. You're talking about investigations, which of course is a huge part of my lens and my bias.
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier that you still get involved in some whistleblower cases and some other cases when they involve a high enough level of
Mhm.
leadership. So I'm surmising, and again, correct me where I'm wrong, that you probably don't get directly involved in as many investigations as you used to. But when
No,
you
I mean, my team manages it, but if there is something that's, involving a very senior leader, the information may come to me first,
Mhm.
and or to Keith, to my chief, and then he'll tap me, and then I'll decide whether or not it's something I should pass on to my team. Very rarely do I do that myself now, because I have an amazing, um, you know, team of people who are very capable of managing that. But the political landscape, you have to, when it's somebody really senior, you have to be really, really thoughtful about your strategy and your plan and how you'll report back. And so, yeah, whistleblower cases come through our ethics team and our ER team. And then when it's at a certain level of out of their scope, they'll call and say, "Hey, can you guys help with this one?" And we're happy to, because I think that's our differentiator. And actually, that's our differentiator here in this organization, is that we are skilled interviewers. There are a lot of professional, super, uber smart people, but they're not good interviewers. And so if they want an interview done that, there's high stakes, this is where Jody Murphy, who's an amazing interviewer, Bart Ariano, myself, we are, I think we're the A team. Bring us in. We'll help you. Oh, you've had a couple conversations already with that, and you're still stuck. Well, let us help. And so this is our superpower, is that we are skilled interviewers and good investigators.
hand in hand. So
Yeah.
where you're typically more involved in the high stakes situations, which thankfully come across far less frequently,
Mhm.
do you do anything to prepare differently because of the stakes in the infrequency of the conversations than you used to when it was more of a everyday part of your role?
Listen, I think the fundamentals are the same, right? You've got to know who you're talking to. You've got to do your homework. You've got to make sure that the investigation is rock solid. So I think the fundamentals are the same, but understanding the leadership mindset. So, like, nobody wants to have this conversation, like, nobody, because sometimes you can have a solid admission. You can get them to admit that that expense fraud, that whatever unethical situation they're responsible for. Oh, those samples that they took home and they're still at home. Those inspiration items that we'll talk about retail. We'll just kind of
Yeah.
link it. And, you know, yeah, they have them. They're at home. They've had them at home for 6 months. Or, oh, yeah, that priceless piece of art. They were just transporting it, but it's still at home. And the sentiment of the organization about that leader is ultimately going to be the decision maker in terms, it don't matter like how guilty they are or how great your interview was. At the end of the day, if the organization is not going to separate from them, you got to get it in your head in advance. It's not personal. And that used to drive me freaking crazy. And, I would say as time went by, how I prep for an interview like that is do not become personally attached to how this person should be managed or disciplined. Let it go. You are there as liaison between the company and this situation. You're there to report what you've learned. And beyond that, it's not personal. And so I don't even think about where I didn't think about it with the average, investigation, but with senior leaders when they'd be brought back, maybe with a warning that nobody knew about, and they are dirty, dirty, dirty. And but the organization was willing to forgive and to deviate from their normal precedents. I think is that is something you have to be okay with. You have to. It's not a reflection of your interview. It's not a reflection of your the time or the quality of your investigation. It is really a decision that was made, and you got to let it go. Whatever you want to do, it's not my decision. And I do think that earned me some respect in retail because I would pitch my best recommendation on what should happen. I would remind them that's a criminal matter. But it was their decision. It's in the environments I've worked in, it's always their decision. I am not judge and jury.
Yeah.
And so I think that that is different, and you have to be okay with that. I don't know that a lot of investigators get into those situations early in their careers. It happens with time and seasoning and maturity, but that can make you nuts if you're not prepared for, I put all this work into this. I did all these interviews. These people want justice and no justice comes.
Yeah. I learned that lesson the hard way. My second loss prevention stop where I'd been investigating a leader for months. I mean, like, and to keep it confidential, I'm talking like at home on my coffee table, putting all the work in.
Yep.
I had to get levels of permission to even do the interview, execute, full admission. This decision is always out of our hands, really. But in this case specifically, I show up the next day and here he is. And it took my leader, Greg Smith, who was awesome to work for. He had to like take me on a long walk
to talk you down, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it was a valuable lesson to learn. So you hit it perfect. I'm keeping on the clock. I know you're really busy. I've got two quick questions I'd love to ask you just to wrap it up. At the very beginning of the conversation, you mentioned having two particular women mentors that you looked up to and you wanted to be like them in your career. You no doubt have become that woman for, I'm guessing, hundreds of others at this point in your career for how long you've been in the industry and everywhere that you've worked. So I'm curious, what did you, let me ask the question this way. How did coming up in a male dominated industry help you become a more effective leader as your career developed?
Male dominated industry, I had great allies. So I had leaders my very first loss prevention leader, I wasn't even in the field. I was a store detective, and then, I got pregnant pretty young early in my marriage. I married my coworker. So, that's scandalous. He went to work someplace else, and I stayed, and I was pregnant, and I had to go back into the corporate office because they didn't let women at that time work the field and be pregnant. Can you imagine how long ago? That's like 30 something years ago.
I was gonna say, it sounds like
And
2017.
uh, so I remember that director like recognizing my potential and, shaming everybody else that the effing admin has more sense than for you. He was just really like outrageous. And I loved him. I still love him. And I worked for, John Gantline, and I worked for Jay Fogg and Keith White, um, who changed my life. You know, Keith White was the man who said, go finish your education. What are you doing? What are you waiting for? Go do that. So, I am grateful that I probably was a little bit oblivious to um, my gender in the early years, but as I look back, I had really great allies who were, male leaders. I had a female leader, Diane Agate, who was not a loss prevention leader. She was not a security leader. And she was one of Keith's vice presidents, and I was a senior director, and he wanted me to go work for her. And I was like, no, she doesn't even understand loss prevention. And he's like, yeah, but you do, and you can teach her. And probably the best leader I ever had was Diane Agate. And there weren't a lot of females around me, like generally, there weren't. And I was lucky enough to work with women like Lisa Labruno and, so many other, Orla Murphy, who's a colleague of mine, who I think together we look at what we admire in the skill, and we apply all those things, and we work hard to do well. I had a coach for years, Bobby Silton. She was our head of philanthropy at the Gap, and she would always say, "Be over prepared. Don't just be prepared. Be over prepared." And these folks, I will be forever grateful for them because they invested in my career. They believed in me. And there were times that I didn't think I had the potential, but they did. They spoke this future into my life, and they inspired me. And so I'm super grateful for having great allies and great role models.
And no doubt there are plenty of people who are saying the same thing about you on some other podcast somewhere. So I want to ask real quick, I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm going to jump into the next question. For people who are, you mentioned earlier, young investigators in their career, what would be the biggest piece of advice that you would share for them as they are looking to develop from investigators into leaders?
Operate with integrity. Do not cut corners. Do not lie to get an admission. Operate with integrity. Operate with trust. Be clear in your communication. Know your facts. Do not skew your facts. And I think that, you know, most investigators get the opportunity to go and sit with other investigators and other interviewers. And sometimes you see things that you should never apply to your own discipline. And don't get tempted. Don't get tempted to cut corners. And I think that when you have that discipline in the interrogation, interview, investigation space, that translates into every aspect of leadership. One of our best friends, he was actually the best man in our wedding. He was an amazing investigator. He worked for the department stores we grew up in. He worked for Lang Bryant. Did all that whole circuit. He is a top commercial sales leader because the skills that he learned as an investigator translated and continue to help him build his leadership profile outside of retail loss prevention. So, yeah, there you go.
I love it. And I'm completely in line that I think that that platform serves as such a great jumping off point to so many different careers. Once you embrace, like you said, that empathetic curiosity and how you build rapport and how you demonstrate integrity and how you ask questions and communicate with people and beyond. I know you've got a packed schedule. I really appreciate you fitting in the interview today. I have no doubt that people are listening to this conversation and they'd love to connect with you. So if anybody is interested in potentially connecting with you, learning from you, learning more about you, is there some place where they should go to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. On LinkedIn, they can connect with me and send me a message. So I know you're not just some random salesperson trying to sell me something that, yeah. just connect with me on LinkedIn. Tell me that, you heard this conversation and you want to talk more. I'm happy to. I feel like most of my job today is giving back, developing people, and supporting this amazing industry that we're a part of. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you including this as part of your giving back and supporting the industry. It's been great speaking with you. It's been great getting to know you. And I'm really looking forward to our next conversation, whenever it might be.
Thanks.
Take care. Be safe. We'll talk to you soon. Debbie, thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. I'm so happy we finally had the opportunity to meet, to connect, to have these conversations. And I really look forward to continuing the relationship moving forward. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the stories that you shared. It helped bring home all of the lessons, all of the ideas, all of the experience that you had, and gave us real tangible ways to apply things in our lives. That Japan story you told, that it's not the Japanese necessarily that are stealing, but it's people who are visiting Japan, serves as such a great opportunity to stay alert for new ways to connect with people, to help them save face, to align what we want to do with their self-image, their priorities, in order to build credibility and trust and have ideas accepted. That was a tremendous illustration. I really appreciate how you talked about the importance of our credibility and our integrity and finding new ways to demonstrate that regularly. And man, I was so happy to hear you talk about saying yes as often as possible. That's true with our teams. That's true with our children. There's going to be no shortage of opportunities to say no. But if all we ever do is say no, people are going to find a way to do what they want anyway, especially children. So I was so happy to hear you talk about the importance of saying yes as often as possible. A great conversation, Debbie. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to everybody who joined us for this conversation as well. I hope you took just as much away from it as I did. Please, before you go, once again, take a second to like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show, let your friends know about it, let your colleagues know about it. And please take a moment to check out the show notes and visit our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com and enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the best-in-class training to understand when people's emotions are shifting based on recognizing changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. It's all backed by science, and it's there for you. For the professional interviewers, you can head over to certifiedinterviewer.com, learn all you need to know about what you can not only get from, but contribute to the International Association of Interviewers, and how do you qualify, prepare for, and then leverage the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And while you're online, you can head over to inquasive.com to learn more about the programs our clients ask us to customize for their senior leaders, sales teams, and HR teams, to teach them how to apply the persuasive communication and strategic observation skills necessary to obtain the everyday confessions hiding in their high-value conversations. Thank you so much for being here week after week. We truly appreciate it. Please stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.